Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, new research has revealed that your browser cache might actually contain a lot more than you might expect. And we've got the details on some security problems that WordPress just doesn't seem to have the fix for. Plus a big batch of your questions, our thoughts on rolling your own email server, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 115 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on June 20th, 2013. This episode's brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about GoDaddy as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible Scale Engine. Go over to ScaleEngine.com and check them out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris. Everybody, thanks for watching.
Hello, sir. The TechSNAP train continues on to 115. I think we got a great episode this week, too. A lot of emails again. There's been some pretty big stories in the news that have generated a lot of people into coming up with some home projects that we'll get to some of those.
Cool.
And I think, the show, at least from my side of the show, has often taken the stance about not hosting a server at home. I don't know. A couple of these emails we got this week might change my tune, so we might talk about that.
The main reason not to host a server at home is it's against the terms of service of your internet connection.
Right, but I'm a rebel, Alan. I'm a rebel.
Right.
No, you're right.
I have a giant home file server. I just don't run the mail server for it or the web server for it at home because of, A, it's against the terms of service, and B, a mail server on a consumer connection is going to get blacklisted and you're not going to get your mail anyway.
It's going to be awful. But I think we'll read some of the reasons why they want to do it and maybe chat what some of their options are.
In certain cases, if you only want mail for a LAN or an office or something, that is fine.
Now, now you're thinking, now you know where I'm going. See, this is where I was going to go is maybe, I'll save it. I'll save it for the feedback.
That's not the same thing. Right. It's different. But anyway.
No. But what I'm going to do, Alan? I'm going to expand upon that. We'll expand upon that later. But first, we should start with the news, like is tradition here on the TechSNAP program. And our first story warns us that perhaps there could be sensitive data in the cache. What's going on, Alan?
Yes. Researchers from a firm basically found that 21 popular financial sites store some form of sensitive information about your account in the cache on your computer.
Huh.
Or rather, that the sites don't properly instruct your browser not to store it.
Aha.
So years ago, browsers were very wary about caching anything that was served over HTTPS. Because it was generally meant it was secure, right? But starting with Firefox 4, about that time, more and more sites started using HTTPS all the time, right? Originally, HTTPS was only used for your login phase, and then everything else was over regular HTTP because HTTPS had a lot of overhead, right? It was expensive CPU-wise, especially on the servers. Now, with cryptographic acceleration and stuff, you can do a ton of SSL, and it really is not going to hurt performance. So, sites like Gmail and Facebook since 2010 have basically done all HTTPS. Nothing is ever over plain HTTP. So that caused a problem with Firefox where it would have significantly worse performance than, say, Chrome, because in Firefox they didn't cache anything over HTTPS, whereas in Chrome they did, unless the server said otherwise.
Right.
So Firefox in Firefox 4 changed their stance on it. And Internet Explorer has always had the stance of caching everything unless you tell it not to.
Right.
But some secure sites are supposed to send a special header instructing the browser which files not to cache so that, we don't end up caching things that are sensitive. But a lot of the sites seem to send a non-standard header that only works in Internet Explorer. Right? That's not respected by Chrome or Safari or Firefox.
I see.
And yeah, as someone in the chat room points out, shouldn't pages with confidential data send no cache? Not actually correct. They should send no store, because no cache only applies to proxies, not to the end user. It's not quite the same thing. You have to read the HTTP spec to understand the difference. I have a link to that in the show notes.
Yes, you do.
Researchers from independent security evaluators in Baltimore conducted a survey of 30 of the most popular financial and healthcare-related sites and found very disappointing results. 21 of the 30 stored something they shouldn't have. And the quote here is, non-technical users likely believe that if, after visiting a site and viewing personal data, if they log out and close their browser, that the data will be safe. Our finding proves this assumption is incorrect in 70% of the cases tested.
Wow.
So that means if someone gets a malware on your computer or just sits down at your computer, they can go through your browser cache and possibly find that sensitive information.
Well, and for this type of user set too, that might not have considered this kind of things, these are also the type of people that take their machines into Joe's repair computer shop or whatever, right?
So or people that use public machines.
Oh yeah, like a
like
like a library machine or something.
Yeah, like at the college, there's an open computer lab, and people walk in and they check their email or whatever, not realizing that. From my own work in the past, I don't know about now, but in the past, Hotmail saved copies of the drafts into your cache as part of the spell checker. So the spell checker would basically save out your draft email and then run the spell checker on it, because it was like an ActiveX plugin or something. This is years ago. But anyway, that meant if you browse through your cache, you could see various copies of the draft versions of your emails. So while I wouldn't have access to all of your email, when doing analysis on a laptop that had been... a guy stole a bunch of information from the company and sold it to another company and went to work for them. And the company, through their lawyer, made him give back his old laptop. And then by, undeleting stuff and going through his web cache and stuff, we managed to prove that he had been in communication with the company he was leaving the first company for. And, there was stuff about, setting up his utilities to move to Texas. And,
wow.
like emails back and forth proving that there was, a plan and that this was malicious.
Well, it seems to me part of the problem is every modern browser now has the incognito mode, but a lot of users just don't even know about it, or because people didn't, haven't learned to use it.
That's another recommendation, is that if you use the private browsing mode, then as soon as you switch out of private browsing mode, anything that was cached or cookied goes away. And up until recent versions of Firefox, it was kind of a pain, because if you had a bunch of stuff open and then you switch to private browsing mode, everything you had open went away.
Yeah.
Now it's a separate window, and that doesn't happen.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know if you have the page up, the link at the bottom there, but it has a bunch of pictures of some of the stuff they found in the cache.
Oh.
But they found sites like ADP, which is a payroll processing site.
Oh, yeah. I see
Verizon Wireless, Scottrade, which is trading stocks on the NYSE and NASDAQ.
And they're just,
Geico, which is an insurance company. Equifax, which is your credit report. PayPal, Allstate, which is car and home insurance, were among the sites that would save items like your prescription information, utility bills, images of checks you've deposited, and credit reports onto your hard drive.
MetLife, Toyota Financial. Wow.
Yeah.
Equifax.
Anybody that had access to your browser cache could maybe see that check that you deposited, which has all your bank routing information on the bottom and a bunch of other stuff. In the report, they also list which sites have done something about it. So they submitted the information to all of these companies, and PayPal eventually acknowledged it. Like when you submit stuff to PayPal, there's like an automated response right away, and then there's later a response that says we were able to decrypt your message and it wasn't corrupted. And then eventually you get a response from a real human, and at that they've got to that phase. But as far as I know, as far as the report says, PayPal hasn't fixed the problem yet. Although PayPal was only storing like your name and address in the cache, not like your credit card number. Although there were a couple sites on here that actually stored your credit card number. Or, at your bank, when you can download your statement and your statement has your whole credit card written on it, and that gets cached, that can be a problem.
Yeah. I can't believe at the level of detail they're able to. I guess I can. Yes, I can actually believe it. Just from a tech support angle, I've seen this. Just working on people's computers.
Independent security evaluators identified 4 different ways that you can tell Internet Explorer not to cache sensitive information. Only one of those is actually an HTTP standard, and that's the way all other browsers do it. But a lot of sites do it the Internet Explorer only way.
Do you think this goes back to sort of your computer is your sanctuary, so it's totally safe to have your credit card data on there because it's your computer, and this philosophy just doesn't take into account for
No, I think
malware and
part of the problem is that online banking systems were mostly designed in the early 2000s when Internet Explorer was 90% of the market share. So, they were doing it properly by sending a header that caused Internet Explorer not to cache it.
Right.
The problem was they weren't doing it a standardized way.
They haven't modernized for all the other browsers that are very popular now.
Yes. Or, technically Firefox before 4.0, like 3.6, didn't cache anything over HTTPS. So the bank maybe didn't have to worry. But you can't base stuff on behavior of the browser. It should be based on the standard because the behavior of the browser can change at any time.
And it does, as we saw at Firefox 4.0 when they started caching.
They're like, hey, we want Facebook not to be slow in Firefox.
Yeah.
Which makes perfect sense. And, the standard says the browser and any interim proxies are allowed to cache it unless you specifically say otherwise. And so the fault is on the sites, not the browsers. But, this type of research is the only way we're going to bring this to the forefront and actually get people to do it properly.
Right. And I kind of like the shock factor that showing in this one, you can see, that guy actually has a very good score.
Redacted out check. There's
you can see his credit score. Yeah. I mean, so that's very, when you see that kind of, when you see the redacted check or you see the credit score, it resonates more.
Yeah. And, these are just files you can browse around in your browser cache. I know Internet Explorer's browser cache is readable. I think in Firefox, they're done up in chunks to be friendlier to fragmentation on the hard drive. So they're a little harder to view, but all the data is in there.
Yeah. Very interesting stuff, Alan.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I believe now, did you want to take a break here or should we go to our next story?
Yep.
All right. We'll take a break. And first I want to say, I haven't mentioned this for a couple episodes in a row, but Alan and I, we do this show live on Thursdays over at jblive.tv and jblive.info for the audio stream at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 Eastern. And you can hang out in our chat room and jackal at us from afar and, distract down. Every now and then, during, we usually talk with the chat room for a few minutes in between segments, and often the show production holds up so Alan can correct somebody who is wrong about something in the chat room. It's like, hold on.
A lot of time people ask a question in the middle of my explanation. I'm like,
right, no, I know. Yes, every now and then the show goes on hold, though, so Alan can correct you. So if you want to come get corrected by Alan, you show up in our chat room and hang out. But all right. I do want to thank... No, I'm teasing. I'm totally teasing. But the problem is it really nasty if you're usually right? You know what I'm saying? It's not like you're wrong, so...
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank our sponsor, GoDaddy.com. GoDaddy.com, longtime sponsors now of the TechSNAP program because they know you guys are out there in the field and you need to do this kind of stuff all the time. And that's why they've hooked us up with a special deal, Tech $249, to get a .com for $2.49. Also, we've got another code, 35 off 3. 35 off 3 gets you 35% off anything for your first time order. So both these are really good. These are both fantastic deals. But man, that Tech 249, that's not going to be around for too much longer. If you need a .com for anything, a home mail server, anything at home, a group project you're working on, a silly little blog you want to throw up, or one thing I always recommend is if you can get your name, do it now. Get your name registered. That way you own it and just have it redirect to your Google profile page or your Twitter account or DevNull, I don't care. Just go over to GoDaddy.com and use the code Tech249 when you check out and get a .com for $2.49 and say hello to my good friend Danica Patrick. She and I hang out on Saturdays via Google Hangouts. Literally, we hang out in a Hangout. At least I think it's her. She doesn't always turn her camera on. Sometimes it sounds like a man, too. But I'm pretty sure it's Danica, and she always wants you to use Tech249 when you check out at GoDaddy.com. And thanks to GoDaddy for being awesome longtime sponsors. Thanks to you guys for keeping us going by supporting our sponsor. So it's a little circle of love. And I love Circle of Love. See what I did there? Thanks, GoDaddy. All right, Alan. Our next story brings us to the depths of the internet and back up to Amazon. And to the NSA a little bit.
What are you talking about?
I don't know. I feel like anything you can add depths of the internet to makes it a lot more dramatic. So it's a new thing.
Yeah, you're kind of
Actually, this is kind of like a good guy Amazon story, isn't it?
A little bit.
Uh-oh.
There's some caveats at the end. That's all, but yes.
Okay. What's going on?
So at a cloud conference that held recently, an Amazon executive was quoted as saying, "If a U.S. entity is serving us with a legally binding subpoena, we contact our customer and work with that customer to fight the subpoena. We will do that proactively and help the customer in any way to comply with the subpoena or to fight it. So basically, Amazon's saying if the government makes a request to have data off the Amazon cloud, they will tell the customer about it and try to help the customer fight the government's getting access to the data.
Okay, so instead of just doing like a blanket handover and just sort of tucking their tail in and giving them the data, they're going to say, hello, Mr. Fisher. We've been contacted by the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and they'd like your data, and we'd like to help you fight this. Is that what they're going to do, or is it something else?
Basically.
Okay, that's
Kinda.
actually pretty good.
Although Amazon also recommends that you encrypt all data you store in the cloud, because that obviates the problem entirely. However, many such requests from U.S. agencies will include a gag order, right? This is the one, like all the PRISM ones have a gag order saying, hey, you can't tell the person that we're monitoring them.
Right, yeah, all these national security letters. And
that would prevent Amazon from telling you and trying to help you fight it, right? So if so they say if Amazon faced a subpoena that required it to keep the order secret, if you had encrypted your data, that would be very useful to the customer, because if the data is encrypted, we'd be handing over ciphertext, and then the NSA wouldn't be able to read it.
So what they're really saying is, if we get an NSL we can't tell
Amazon's
you.
Amazon's saying, we will tell you if we can and help you fight the government getting access to data. But what you should really do is encrypt it so that we can give it over and it's useless to them because they won't have the keys.
I guess maybe that's good, but I guess it's as good as they can do.
Basically.
Under the law. Yeah.
So basically, they'll help you where they can, and they recommend that you encrypt stuff so that it doesn't matter if they're forced to help the government or not.
Now, it's interesting because it looks like IT World reached out to Rackspace for comment on their policy as well.
Yes. Amazon's main rival, Rackspace, said, Rackspace reviews any order to determine that they are lawful and that they have been issued in accordance with the Fourth Amendment. We are prohibited from accessing and disclosing customer data stored on their servers or storage devices in our data centers without a properly issued lawful request from a court with jurisdiction over both Rackspace and the data that is being sought. In the event Rackspace receives a court order for customer data that does not adhere to the Fourth Amendment, Rackspace will oppose the order. So basically, when the Amazon executive said that, the Rackspace guy who's on the same panel was like, I'm not a lawyer. I don't actually know what our policy is. And then that block of text came later from their lawyer, which you could probably tell from the way it reads. But it basically says mostly the same thing.
We are living in amazing times. I cannot even believe...
Except Amazon says that they will actually go as far to try to help you fight it, whereas Rackspace just says, we double check that they have legitimate right to make the request first. A lot of places, like smaller places, will just, if they get a request, they will hand over data without actually, checking that the person requesting the data actually has access.
Yeah.
Like sometimes going as far as you can pretext, right? You call up, pretend to be from the police, and get data that without anybody even checking that it's a legal request.
Mm-hmm. I mean, are we entering an age where these cloud hosting companies are actually going to compete on how well they defend you from the United States government? Or am I making more out of this than it seems? Or is this actually is Amazon saying, well, we're going to defend you?
I've seen ads from Canadian data centers being like, hey, come hide from the DMCA.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Wow. I'm kind of left speechless by that.
It's a little bit less of that and more, a lot of countries have laws saying certain sensitive information can't be exported out of the country.
Yeah.
Right. That's why Amazon started popping out data centers in Europe and so on, because some European data protection laws say you can't just store the data in the States, because then the U.S. government has access to it. And so on. And, like a bunch of the data we store for the Ontario government, it's all stuff having to do with schools and like students in like grades 7 through 10, right? So they're all underage and everything. So we have a backup server for that data. And, we had to get another server in Canada. Like we only really have the main site in Toronto. And so we had to get one in Montreal just because normally we would just back the stuff up to one of our servers in the States, but that particular information isn't allowed to be exported.
Well, I don't know. It makes me want to just...
angle to add to the story, Amazon has also won a contract to build a $600 million private cloud for the CIA.
Right.
A contract that is being protested by IBM.
Oh, because IBM wants the deal?
Well, IBM feels that they were unfairly not considered.
Well, I'm sure IBM has some good contracts with the NSA and the use of Watson. So I'm sure IBM's doing
and
fine.
the interesting thing about this Amazon cloud is that the CIA won't be using the same Amazon cloud everybody else is. This will be Amazon building a cloud for the CIA at the CIA's location.
Which is interesting because
interesting because that doesn't seem like something that.
Right, like they're like, well, hey, Amazon, we've seen that you've built a cloud. Maybe you could build a cloud for us. And this is all big hearsay warning, but I've worked with two different guys, because Amazon is a Washington State company. I've worked with two different guys who worked in Amazon's IT area who says that a huge portion of their infrastructure is really duct taped together. Like they've replaced massive portions of networking stacks with their own custom code. They've connected a bunch of systems together that, aren't normally meant to go together, and they're constantly having issues and upgrades, break compatibility all the time. Like, I guess from the two guys that I've worked with, they're not actually particularly well known for an amazing platform. What they're well known for is managing it in such a way that they're able to keep it all running while it's having those issues.
Rather, for just having a popular platform because it was so cheap and it was kind of the first to market.
And see, they didn't build the system to it was designed to support the Amazon e-commerce system, and so it was there's a few.
And then they just scaled it out, right?
Exactly. So it's not like
we might need all this capacity, so let's build it. And I was like, well, it's just sitting there, so let's rent it out.
It doesn't make them, though, the mecca of reference where you go, oh, well, look how the elastic cloud works. Let's go with Amazon.
Right.
Yeah. And it's an interesting side business for Amazon at that. I mean, we'll see them do this for other governments.
It was really strange. Like, it seems kind of outside Amazon's core competency to go build a version of the cloud somewhere else.
Yeah.
Although, it's a decent chunk of money, and maybe for Amazon, it would be a chance to, well, let's architect a new version of the cloud on someone else's dime in an isolated thing, right? So basically, we get to build this whole new version of the cloud, and if it works out well, then we will use that as the next generation cloud at Amazon.
Of course, that's what's going to happen. Of course. Right. I mean, of course, that's what they have to do. Wow, amazing.
Well, not necessarily. They could stamp out their existing system.
Right, but I mean, they're not going to. I mean, as any smart business, that would be a great R&D playground to try out some of the new things you've been wanting to do in your system. And then later, when you got to convince the board of why it was a good idea, you can say, hey, we did it here in this test run. It worked out great. Worked out real good. Interesting times, interesting stuff. Big things to think about. All right, well...
Kind of how Scale Engine got into doing video streaming.
Right. I always... I kind of panic a little bit when you have a story in our show notes that has WordPress in the headline. A lot of WordPress sites out there. I run a few myself.
Well, this isn't about WordPress itself, but the plugins.
Okay, all right. Okay, so what's going on with the plugins?
So security researchers at a firm called Checkmarks found that currently 12 of the top 50 WordPress plugins are susceptible to common types of attack. They also found that 7 of the top 10 e-commerce plugins contain flaws as well. So many popular plugins are susceptible to common attacks like SQL injection, cross-site script injection, cross-site request forgery, remote or local file inclusion, and path traversal. Right, so an SQL injection is where you add something to a form and basically make it run your own code in the SQL, which allows you to dump out a database or delete a database or whatever, right?
Yeah.
We've all seen the XKCD little Bobby tables.
Yeah.
Cross-site scripting injection is basically where you cause a script to be included from some remote site and run, or by typing a certain thing in a form, all of a sudden JavaScript that I provide will run in the browser of either me or some other person. Meaning I can trick someone to clicking a link that actually goes to a reputable site, but it fires off evil code that I wrote. Right? Like at one point there was a cross-site forgery thing at CNN where the Onion could provide a certain URL that linked to CNN.com, but actually loaded the content from the Onion, which was, the greatest example of how you would do injection on a news site, right?
That's fine.
Cross-site request forgery is basically where you make a form on one site and make it submit to a different site. So basically where I can trick your site into responding. And then the remote and local file inclusion are especially bad. That's basically where you get PHP code that I provide to run on someone else's website. Or with a local file inclusion, for example, if the site lets me upload something, say images, well, I could upload a PHP script and name it like it's an image, and then use local file inclusion to cause that website to run that PHP file, even though it's JPEG, and then cause that site to run my malicious code and do whatever I want, like steal their database or hack the site or whatever.
Yeah.
And then path reversal just ways for me to get access to the files I'm not supposed to get access to on the site.
Jeez, what a mess. See, this problem is the WordPress source code itself can be audited and constantly improved upon, but then if you install one of these plugins, they can wreak havoc.
Right. So it says, a quote here, first of all, web admins think that if they're downloading these plugins from a reputable source, then there's an assumption that they're receiving a secure plugin. Right? When you go and download the plugin from WordPress.org or whatever, you think it's good, but that's just a listing. Anybody can make a plugin and install it there. And if it gets a lot of problem reports, they might pull it down, but they don't actually check the plugins before they post them. The checkmarks researchers started in January. In January, there was actually 18 of the top 50 WordPress plugins had vulnerabilities. But when they did their scan in June, they found that every single plugin that they had tested had a newer version out, but only 6 of those newer versions actually fixed the vulnerabilities. So that leaves the 12 out of 50 that are still vulnerable.
Yeah.
In their research paper, they have the list of the plugins that have been fixed, but the names of all the plugins that are still broken are blacked out because responsible disclosure. They want to wait until those guys fix the problems before they go about announcing what the problems are.
Well, if you're a WordPress operator, and I know a few of you out there are, this paper isn't too long. It's probably worth a check.
Yes, well, because for example, one of the plugins that was fixed is one that you use.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you get the updated version.
But the problem is, see, when I update that one, it sometimes breaks the settings. It's a pain in the butt.
Yep.
I'll have to wait till I can go, Alan, I broke it.
All kinds of fun.
Wow. Well,
So the researchers recommend that you only download plugins from official sources, whether you're using WordPress or
and
Drupal
always
or
check
something.
the comments and stuff. That's always a good thing in the ratings.
But the research also recommends that official sources like WordPress.org conduct some security scans on plugins before they just list them. Now, doing a full code audit on every plugin that's submitted is a kind of an onerous thing to do on WordPress.org.
Yeah.
And if they do some testing and don't disclaim it entirely, does that make them possibly partly responsible for bad things that get through their testing from a legal standpoint? So I don't know how much they actually want to do. But, it would be better if kind of like, the Apple Store for iPhone apps where they do some checking on the app before it gets listed. At the same time, you don't want there to be a large delay in updating plugins, right? If every time I submit a patch for my plugin, it has to go through 30 days of being audited or whatever, that means that the fix for the problem doesn't get out for more time because of it needs to be checked to make sure there's not a bug in it, right? So if they miss a bug and then I fix it, it takes 30 days for the fix to get posted, then it actually is making the vulnerability worse, not better.
Yeah, I couldn't really see them doing like an app store kind of check thing. It seems like if WordPress was being developed today from scratch, they would never give the plugins this much free run of the system. They'd probably have limited functionality.
They don't have that much free run of the system, but it's PHP code. Anybody
right. Well, I guess that's what I mean is they'd probably have to develop some sort of way to isolate these somehow,
or even just bothering to do some checking on the top 50.
Yeah, that would. That seems reasonable.
A star on certain plugins saying these
verified
ones are more trusted.
Yeah. Now there you go. And that seems like a little more responsible now that a lot of really big sites are using WordPress for
but they're not paying WordPress. So, it's an open source project. They don't really have the resources to be auditing stuff.
What about the folks who do pay?
Well, they're paying for the platform as a service and the hosting. They're not I don't know that if does WordPress sell support contracts if you're
probably,
a giant website running?
It just seems like they almost have a responsibility when they get to this size where they have commercial businesses built around their platform.
Right, but again, that's
I know, you're right.
It's up to the commercial business to pay somebody to. So it might make sense at some point for someone to start as a business a trusted WordPress repository where the plugins actually get audited by that company or whatever.
Right.
And, it's like, here's a repository of plugins where we know that it actually works.
That is an interesting thought, Mr. Allen. Maybe we'll see something like that.
Free business plan. Like,
yeah, there you go. Alan's that one's a freebie for just being a TechSNAP audience member. You get that one for free.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all the news we have for this week. Before we go, I just want to remind folks that you can help support the ever-increasing cost this network has. I have a little hardware upgrades I'm doing here, and I just want to remind... Yeah, no, nothing really too little about it, actually. We have our affiliate links at the bottom of our website for Amazon and Newegg and ThinkGeek and all that goodness. And if you click on those before you shop, you'll tag your shopping session so that Jupiter Broadcasting gets credit. And I want to also make a reminder that we have these extensions available for Firefox and Chrome, and every now and then they get disabled. And I suspect maybe some of them are disabled because I got an email from Newegg that said, hey, we've seen a big drop-off on your affiliate sales. What's going on? What's going on? I said, I don't know. Maybe you just don't have any good deals. Then I thought, well, maybe some of the extensions aren't working. So I want to remind folks to go check their browser extension to see if it's turned on. And if you don't have it, maybe consider grabbing it. We're always pushing out updates, and it's pretty nice. And then that way, whenever you're shopping at not only affiliates that we have listed at the bottom of our site, but a couple others like Monoprice, you don't even have to worry about like clicking a link or anything like that. It just tags the whole dang shopping session, and then it gets contributed to Jupiter Broadcasting. That's a great way to support our network while you're getting yourself something. And I love the idea.
I bought all the stuff to wire my basement from Monoprice with the affiliate code.
Boom! Look at you, Alan. Look at you setting a good example. I love the idea of the audience getting themselves like a cool gadget, and like a little bit of that goes to Jupiter Broadcasting. That does seem pretty cool.
Well, I didn't get a cool gadget, but I got a punch-down tool, a cable tester.
That's kind of cool.
A punch-down block. A bunch of ends, some surface mounting boxes.
I think in this crowd that might be considered cool. I don't know.
Kind of.
Yeah.
There you go. TrustedWordPressPlugins.com is available on GoDaddy. Buy it now.
There you go.
Don't forget to use the TechSNAP coupon code.
Tech249. Very good. All right, Alan. Well, with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, like our first email this week, which isn't an email, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. What do you say, Alan, when we get started with our first question this week? I think it's a good one.
Sure.
Got submitted to our subreddit by TechSNAP. He says he's got some foolish text ahead, but he's going to go ahead and ask us anyways. So as we know, virtually all high-end routers and switches have serial access, RS-232, for configuring and management of the device. But how is this managed remotely later on? Are switches and routers just SSH'd into? I understand that there may be a VPN to connect to prior connecting switches or routers. As old as serial is, I see it being very beneficial because it doesn't depend on a network connection. But I don't understand how this can be managed remotely. Can somebody clear this up? You probably have had this before, Alan, right?
Yeah. A lot of them will have SSH or a web interface to allow you to do it remotely. And, the serial is the backup in case, the IP address it was configured with doesn't work in your network anymore. Most of them have a DHCP now, but originally they didn't. So your initial configuration had to be done over serial. Mm-hmm. So yes, well, a lot of them will have, SSH or a web interface or something. Some of them will be console only because they're older or because they're meant to be secure, not be put on the internet. Like a lot of SCADA systems will have a serial port, but no network connection of any kind. So there are these things called serial servers. They were popular before, less so now, but it was basically a big box that you would put in a rack and it had, an Ethernet connection and then like 10 serial ports. And you'd run a cable to all your different equipment. And then you could SSH into that and say, hey, I'd like to connect to port number 7. And you'd then have serial access to that machine over SSH. And so there was that. Or there are also single version ones. Like I'm sure you can buy it at Monoprice, actually. Maybe not. But it's a little tiny box. It's got like an Ethernet port and a serial port and a power connection. And you hook it up to the serial port and the Ethernet. And now you can connect to that box and then over serial to connect to the device.
Yeah, I used to have these devices look just like switches, and they would have, it would be Ethernet ports on one end, and then the Ethernet on the other end would have a serial connector, so it wasn't actual Ethernet. And
right, it was a rollover cable.
Yeah,
they were called.
yeah, And then you would just
it'd be
connect
like a
into
flat Ethernet cable. One end was
Yep.
Ethernet, and the other end was RS-232.
Yeah, and then you just connect into that, and then I would have a selection of all the devices that were attached to that.
Yeah, and now sometimes that's a bad idea, right? Like these, we talked about this before. These SCADA systems that were not designed for being connected to the internet, so they had like sometimes no authentication, right? You just connect to the serial console and your root.
Yeah.
And then somebody hooks that up to one of these little devices and puts it on the internet. It's like, well, that device was not meant to go on the internet.
Right. Yeah, that is very true.
But in general, yeah. Also, there's technology called serial over LAN, which a lot of things have now. Like most of my servers have it. It's or a lot of my servers also have IPMI, where I can get full KVM over the LAN, which kind of obviates the need for serial at all.
Yeah, for servers, this problem's kind of been solved. It's more for the network devices where you still kind of
Yeah, but most of them have SSH now.
Yeah, thankfully. But like TechSNAP said, it's good if you.
But sometimes you'll want to disable the SSH that's built into the router and then have your own security based on connecting to a console server and then connecting into it over the physical connection.
Yeah, so I worked in this data center where the guy would he would remote into a switch and then he would turn the port on the switch on and off that the console server was plugged into. So you would.
Yep.
He would remote into the switch, and then he would flip the port on, and then you could remote into the console server, and then connect any system you want. And then when you were done, you had to turn off the port in the switch. See, it was like an extra layer, right?
Yeah, or there's some places where they'll have some similar setup, except for the connection to the serial server is over a wireless modem. So, if your internet connection goes down or something, you can dial in over the wireless modem to the serial console server and connect to it. That way, it's if your router goes down, you can't connect to the serial console server if it's behind the router.
Right. Yeah, very true.
Yeah. So if you're adjusting the firewall rules remotely, you want to be able to keep working if your firewall rule all of a sudden blocks you.
I kind of wish I still had dial-up, like just as a backup. So if my connection goes down, I could dial into something somewhere.
Yeah, I don't actually have a dial-up modem in my house anymore.
No, I don't either. I don't either. I mean, I'm sure I could add one in a few seconds with USB, but...
Yeah, I have a couple machines that I guess have a PCI slot.
All right, so I don't know how you pronounce this next one, Alan. Gargan? Oh, jeez. People give me a hard time about the pronunciations. And in the subreddit, they're giving me a hard time in the TechSNAP subreddit about how I pronounce things. I would like to see one of them do one show where they read the names. Look at these names. I couldn't tell you how. And what's funny is the guys busting my balls in the subreddit all have handles that look ridiculous. Like they look like they just yeah.
It's a bunch of random bloody letters.
They've never had to sit here and do this. All right, so Gargan writes in, and I think, Alan, you're going to have to set this guy straight. He says, this might sound like a stupid question, but I want to enumerate my options for a LAN mail server for Windows, which are most common and the best supported ones. So far, I've found these three options: HMail server, Exchange, and Zimbra. Also, Windows Server has phased out POP3 services, but retained SMTP. Why is that? Has this been folded into another package? Well, I'll just answer that last one real quick.
POP3 has been replaced with IMAP.
Yeah.
But SMTP is still required for sending.
Yeah, a lot of web apps still need SMTP and things like that, and so that's why they bundle it with IIS.
There's still no other way to send email except for SMTP. So it's not like you can send mail some other way.
Right. So what do you think, Alan? He said LAN mail server. So
the last time I ran a mail server on Windows was 1999.
Yeah.
It was on my 486, and I was just farting around.
The last time I ran mail on a Windows server was, I think I did not, I don't know. It was definitely Exchange. I can't remember which version.
Right.
I would say go Zimbra myself if I was going to do a home LAN server, because then you get calendaring, you get all that stuff. Mm-hmm. What do you think of this? So I was thinking, I've been trying to come up with a secure messaging system where we can send pictures back and forth, my wife and I, of the kids and all of this kind of stuff. And I was thinking maybe
XMPP over SSL.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe just a little home mail server just for sending stuff back and forth. I don't know. Because I want something where we could be on our phone and take a picture and send it, or we can be at our computer and attach it and send it. So I was thinking...
That kind of works, I suppose, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, that or XMPP, right? Because then it gives you instant messaging, file transfers, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but where that falls down is there's not a lot of good clients on mobile that support inline pictures on an XMPP client. And I want to be able to take a picture from the client and then just send it. And be able to pull it up and look at it, and not have to launch a separate viewer and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Where the mail program does
I guess
all that inline.
if it's only meant for internal use, I suppose your mail could do that way.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of what I was thinking. As it seems like one way, to be secure is just keep as much of your activity on your local LAN as possible. I was
right,
thinking.
and in that case, if the phones are always connecting over SSL, and the files only ever live on your home network, then yes, that would be secure. I
don't know if people out there have a recommendation for a Windows mail server that's not Exchange. Leave a comment in the thread for this episode in the subreddit or wherever you're watching this. Send us an email. I'd be curious to know what people do.
This isn't the answer the guy wants, but you take a virtual box and you put a FreeBSD in it and you run a mail server on it.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's not the answer this guy's looking for because it sounds like he's a Windows admin and wants to do it the Windows way.
Yeah.
So Exchange is expensive, so I guess Zimbra is it open source?
Yeah.
It's designed as a replacement for Exchange. So
part of it's open source at least. All right, so I'm just curious what people say about that. Now we got another one. This one comes in from Monarchy, and he says Raspberry Pi. Maybe we can make it a router and a server. I have a bit of free time on my hands, and I was thinking about getting a Raspberry Pi and getting it set up as a router for my home network, but was wondering if it could also double as a small web/mail server. I have plenty of experience with both FreeBSD and Linux, but was wondering what would be the easiest way of making this happen. Also, I know how much TechSNAP dislikes people running their own web mail servers, but I'm well aware of the risk and I'm willing to try it out after this recent NSA ordeal. Even though I can't fully escape being spied on, I would at least like to physically own my data. Thanks for the help.
Right. The web server, okay. The mail server, the problem is most people are going to reject your mail and not accept the emails you send them.
What do you think about a business home? Like, getting a business a business internet connection?
Oftentimes those ones are in the blacklist anyway.
Yeah, you gotta find out. That's what you gotta know.
But yeah. But the problem with using the Raspberry Pi as a router is it only has one Ethernet port.
Yeah.
Now you can use like software VLANs to try to do it, but it requires
what about like
something on the other side and stuff.
Isn't that Ethernet port on the USB bus too?
Yes, and the Ethernet port is on the USB bus. So the other some people's solution to two Ethernet ports on a Raspberry Pi is a USB Ethernet adapter. The problem is the bandwidth is very limited. You can't even get the full 100 megabits out of the Raspberry Pi adapter as is. So if you plug basically your max throughput on the two of them together. Is going to be like 32 megabits. I happen to have a 100 megabit internet connection, and the most I could get out of the Raspberry Pi without it crashing was 64 megabits through the USB port without using any other devices.
Yeah,
actually, I have my USB keyboard plugged in. I don't know how much bandwidth that's actually using and how the time sharing on USB actually works, but yeah.
This last episode of Last that came out, we did an episode on using a Raspberry Pi as a Tor router. And what I did for that setup is I took a USB Wi-Fi dongle and I made that the AP to connect to. And then the Ethernet was the connection that...
Uplink?
Yeah. And so everything that connected to the AP was then routed over Tor. But I only put like one machine on it. I have no idea what kind of capacity that thing can handle.
And
probably
Tor's slow, so it's going to be slow anyway.
Exactly. It's not a big load.
It's not going to be high performance. So you can do it, but it's going to suck.
Yeah. It's a fun idea. And I love the potential. Like I was thinking about earlier, like maybe several Pis around the house could, maybe instead of having one big monolith server, I have several Pis. Or maybe you got to wait for a future generation. But the potential there is pretty impressive. I've seen a lot of threads recently about people that are setting up own cloud instances on the Raspberry Pi.
I would love a device like a Raspberry Pi, but with 2 or more gigabit interfaces.
Yeah, and maybe dual core.
It'd be like the perfect. Well, I don't need dual core. I just, it'd be the perfect pfSense embedded device.
One of the key things for me is a home server, and this is just because of my kids, needs to be able to do media transcoding. So that kind of takes the Pi out. But maybe for specialized tasks, like a DNS server,
it has some of the video, like it has the video processor. But
yeah, it does.
What do you need to transcode for?
Because they watch on tablets, and like some of the stuff's MKVs or AVIs. So tablets
if you had everything as H.264, then it would play.
Well, you tell that to old Chris who backed things up in stupid formats.
Right. But just because it's in an MKV, you might not have to transcode it necessarily. Right? If it's already H.264,
it depends. It depends.
Just repacketizing it.
Sometimes it has to only transcode the audio, which isn't as bad. Or it kind of depends on the file. But I was thinking, so for me, that kind of eliminates a Pi for that kind of thing, but I could still use a Pi for DNS or maybe a BitTorrent sync server or something like that. I don't know.
Well, BitTorrent's doing a lot of hashing, so it's probably out as well.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe.
Because doing like SSH256 on each block, right?
It's fun, though, to play with. I've really been enjoying the Raspberry Pi. All right, Alan. So our next email comes in from Tim, and he's from Germany, and he has some concerns about some of the privacy stuff recently. He says, hey, Chris. Hey, Alan. First of all, thank you very much for the awesome content you guys keep delivering every week after week. You guys are on a roll. I decided to write you after I've been following the news here in Germany and have been listening to Unfilter and TechSNAP for quite a while now. It's hard to put my frustration all in one email. What I find hard are the recent news evolving around online privacy in general, and Prism in particular, is the balance of keeping my head cool and losing my temper in a burst of anger all about this intrusion into people's privacy. I'm convinced that the only direct action from the people can bring change here. Let's take this matter to the streets and protest against it. Let's keep on writing the representatives and asking questions, and let's incentivize the very people which screw with our rights to remain anonymous and discuss matters without the almighty state listening in on everything. Anyhow, I have a technical question concerning my internet filtering a la Prism. Since the NSA seems to have a master plan of massively collecting information and then just filtering it according to patterns matching terrorist activities or whatever funky patterns, I was wondering if and how we could put their abilities to the test. What if people worldwide in a concentrated, sane manner send emails, did phone calls, and in general behaved on the net as to provoke being falsely flagged by the NSA in such a massive quantities that the whole system becomes an absolute mess? I'm not saying this is the only way we should respond to the recent news, but do you guys think that this could potentially work to screw with their system? How can we pull off something like this? I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this. Cheers from Germany.
Well, the biggest problem with any trying to overwhelm the system or whatever is that the system is designed to find patterns. A pattern of people trying to overwhelm the system is easily ignored, right? Right. If everybody's sending the same message, it's like, oh, that message is a false positive.
And what we've heard from whistleblowers, it sounds like they're not
this
active.
Person,
oh, go ahead.
Right. This person is related to this other person, which we know is trying to game the system and is not actually a threat.
Right.
And so through the analysis of the relationships, they can determine that, hey, all these people are just following this trend. They're not necessarily doing something
Yeah, it kind of sounds like the way it works is there's only a certain set of people that it's actively monitoring. The rest all just get stored and then filtered after the fact if they need to.
It seems, basically their plan is store everything so that when we identify a person as needing looked into, we have the previous data to look into them with.
I mean, until then, it's just all data they're just collecting. And so then it all sit in some database somewhere. Which we've been led to believe could be Oracle databases. I like the idea here in a sense. There are a few efforts, like there's one organizing on Reddit that people are trying to come up with different systems. I honestly think the solution here is
encrypt everything.
Encrypt everything, and then become a champion of encryption to everyone who will understand what the hell you're talking about. Because the more people using it, the less singled out you'll become for using encryption. So it's just time. I mean, if we think about it, it's a little naive that we do so much stuff in plain text anyways. The fact that just because the NSA is doing it right now means somebody else could have done it or has done it at some other point. We should all just be encrypting anyways. But now...
I was reading an article, so I forget where it was, but it was like, the FSB has the NSA beat. Or the NSA has nothing on the FSB was the title.
Right. So I think the point is, Tim, what you really can do is encrypt. That's what we can do. All right, well, kind of along the same lines, Anonymous sent in via bit message. Huh? That's the first TechSNAP bit message. I just arbitrarily mentioned in TechSNAP that I've been playing with bitmessage, and then a handful of people took to the web to scour down. At some point, I had tweeted what my bitmessage address was, and they've been sending me messages for TechSNAP. So people are into it. I'm not so sure I'm ready to endorse it, but I think it's worth at least playing with and testing it for the developer, because it could be really awesome. I mean, it could be a total email killer for at least some people. Anyways, I digress. Anonymous writes in, hey there, Chris and Alan. I saw the recent episode of Last talking about Raspberry Pi Tor proxy. It was pretty awesome. So I've got a related question that could be relevant to both Last and TechSNAP. Is it possible to set up a VM or a jail as a Tor proxy locally and then just proxy all of my traffic through there? If that's possible, how would one set up to proxy all traffic through that VM rather than just having to connect to it regularly? I know that applications can get around system proxies and settings can connect outside of Tor, so how would one force all packets to be encrypted and sent through Tor? Sorry if this sounds like a newbie question, but I find myself quite new to networking and such. I love all your highly informative content. Keep up the amazing work. Anonymous viewer. What do you think, Alan? Could you do a Tor proxy through a jail?
In a VM, yes. In a jail, you have to do a special kind of jail where you have normally jails use an IP address off the host system, but there is a way to use what's called vimage, which basically virtualizes networking and gives you e-pair devices in the jail. And so basically, then you could have your own firewall in a jail.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then basically, the way you make all your traffic go through it is basically changing your default route, right? So replacing your regular home router with the Tor thing, the Tor will encrypt it, and then the Tor thing's default router is your real router. So basically, it puts I say basically too much. You put the Tor router in front of your real router, so all the traffic goes through the Tor and then through the real router. That way, as far as the router sees, everything's going to Tor.
But it sounds like you think a VM would be a better way to go?
No, a jail would work, just not a stock jail. You have to do a vimage jail, which requires a custom kernel.
And then to force everything to route?
If you're using PCBSD, it works.
Oh, okay. And what about forcing everything to...
default in their jail.
What about saying, all right, all my application data, it needs to go to this machine, not to my default
You might
gateway.
have to do it that way. You might have to disable DHCP on your router and run a DHCP server in the jail or VM that's running the Tor setup.
Yeah. So that's why
But if you're doing all your traffic through Tor, it's going to be so slow.
Yeah, brutal. This is why I like the AP method with the Pi, because I just connect to the AP when I want to be on Tor, and then I disconnect. So It's real simple.
So for that, what you do is just change your default route to the Tor thing when you want to route things to Tor.
Yeah.
But,
that's
possibly
also the other way to do
it is on your machine, build a VM with Windows or whatever OS you want in it.
Yeah.
And then when you want to browse through Tor, you do it in the VM.
Yeah.
And only the traffic in the VM goes through Tor because you won't be able to watch the live stream of TechSNAP through Tor.
That is probably the best way to do it is to have a client, to have a VM dedicated to be your Tor browsing appliance.
And, you can also put all your other paranoid stuff in there, like encrypting the disk and, flushing the cache all the time and it's
all
just
your GPG stuff, and then back up that VM with some kind of encryption.
Right, or make it expendable, right? So that you just blow it away all the time, so that no information builds up on it.
Yeah. All right, Sam sent in a little mini war story. This is something at a data center for a few of his customers. He says around 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today, this was the email that was forwarded to him by his hosting provider, there was a security breach due to a vulnerability in Soloist VM that allowed a command line to be run to dump the Chicago VPS Soloist VM client database and attempt to delete all data from our nodes. Our staff is working tirelessly to get everything back online, along with working with SolVM to address the root issue so no further impact is suspected. What does this mean for the customer? All passwords should be changed. This includes passwords for the control panel of your VPS. The data leak does not include billing information or credit card information, though. He passed this along to us because he thought, the TechSNAP audience might like to know that if you have a Chicago VPS...
Right, I meant... no, it was... If you have any VPS provider that was running Solus VM...
Oh, yeah, very true,
A lot of them were targeted. I had this story. I don't know how I forgot to include it in the show today. Solus VM, which is a very popular management panel for VPSs, had a vulnerability and somebody exploited it. It hit RAM node and the guys, a website we've recommended a couple times, the lowendvps.com or something like that, which is basically a directory listing. They have a big forum thread about it.
Okay.
Because they even managed to identify the person who attacked a number of the ISPs.
Oh.
And he's a guy known in the industry and people don't like him very much.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. He also has like his own media servers exposed on some port on his IP address he was hacking from. So he was exploiting these VPS providers from his home with a media center machine exposed on the internet that has his name on it.
Wow. Razone in the IRC chat room has included a link to a Reddit post that has summarized a lot of the providers that were impacted by this. So if
it basically was a zero-day exploit for Solus VM.
If you go over to the TechSNAP subreddit, you guys can find that post.
Even the VPS provider I've used in the past used Solus. I don't think they were affected by this attack, but they were big enough that if I had been the attacker, I would have gone for them instead of a lot of these smaller places.
Yeah. Thanks to Razone, by the way, for putting that list together for us in the subreddit. All right, now Mr. Chuckles writes in, hello there. Mr. Chuckles. All right. I just started listening to the show and enjoy it immensely. I'm 18, and I want to pursue a degree in information security, specifically penetration testing and reverse engineering. I do not want to be a skitty, etc., but interested to become a contributing member of the security community. I have a few questions for you and the listeners. Number one, what resources like sites, books, podcasts do you recommend for learning penetration testing and reverse engineering? Number two, what languages do you believe are absolutely necessary for reverse engineering? I personally have been learning C and C++, a little bit of Python and Bash and Ruby for scripting. What mindsets, this is number three, should I adopt to become an excellent person in this field? Thanks. Love you guys. I really want to contribute. I'll be around. So, to become an excellent pen tester.
Learn some of the tools, I guess. Like Metasploit is a common toolkit to start with.
Yeah, and what did... gosh, I'm totally drawing a blank. Backtrack was renamed. That Backtrack Linux distribution is included.
Sort of with a K, didn't it?
I can't... Why
Kali, maybe?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yep. Kind of reminded me of Kale Linux or something like that.
Yeah.
You can get a link to it.
But yeah, like things like Metasploit and NetExpose, tools like that.
I mean, here's the real answer, and it's not an answer he's going to want to hear. Yeah, Kale Linux, K-A-L-I Linux, is an awesome... I mean, if you want to know about some of the tools that are available for penetration testing, if you want to audit your own network, go check this out. The real answer is that particular industry, you need to be established. You just need to get in and start building a resume.
Basically, there are, read the full disclosure mailing list. You don't have to submit your stuff to the full disclosure mailing list. You can do responsible disclosure. But bug bounty programs are a great way to start too, right? PayPal has one. Microsoft just launched one where you can get up to $100,000 for finding bugs in Windows, or $50,000 for telling Microsoft a way they could avoid getting hacked easier.
That's a good way to build the resume and look like a good guy. I like that.
Yep.
Yeah, because
but basically, a lot of what we feature on this show are these researcher documents explaining things they found, right?
These papers, yeah.
So it doesn't actually have to be penetration testing, right? But basically write a paper and publish it.
Yeah, I guess that's probably a good point too. Don't jump right to penetration testing. Just
right.
kind of get a good grasp in the security field.
The one we featured today was the guys went to a bunch of websites and saw what it left in your cache.
Right.
Or the other one was they looked at a bunch of WordPress plugins and see if they found holes in them.
Right.
Right, and things like that.
That gets your name established. That's good practice. That's good resume tools. Because when you go in to do penetration testing,
research
they have
something, and it can be completely theoretical. Like the one we talked about the other day from two guys that work at the Apache project was just theoretically, how do we keep people from forcing us to give up our encryption keys?
Right. Yeah, it's sort of like social engineering type stuff. You have to remember that if you're going to do penetration testing, these companies, these people that would be hiring you, have to have absolute trust in you, because if you get access to their network, you are getting them in their soft spot. And so you need to give them a reason to trust you. That's where sort of establishing yourself comes in. And obviously that's something you have time here, my friend.
Really, the best way to do that is papers. But the other part is you have to make sure you never do anything that looks bad.
Right. Yeah. Unless you could do it really, really, really bad, and then you get hired by somebody. Yeah, go start with Kali Linux and enjoy that. All right, so good luck, Mr. Chuckles.
Metasploit and so on. Basically, write stuff. You can start it informally, kind of like a blog and just things you see or whatever. But ideally, you'd publish a paper. It doesn't have to be all that long or anything, and it just kind of details some research you did on, something you found, something you postulated, even it doesn't have to actually be happening.
Right, just something to make people think and be, this guy has something interesting to say. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so there you go, Mr. Chuckles. Alan, you have a little status update from the PCBSD project. What's going on there?
Yes, they posted a blog today. They're saying that they're getting ready to move to their rolling release stuff.
Oh, cool.
So with the rolling release, basically, if you're using 9.1 release, you'll stay with the regular version of FreeBSD, but your packages will be updated twice a month on the 1st and the 15th of each month.
Oh.
So that way you'll have more up-to-date packages, which has been kind of a problem before. And then if you choose to use the 9-stable branch, which is basically a lot of new features get added there, and eventually that's what will become 9.2. Because for example, 9 stable just got support for trim support in ZFS.
Yeah.
Right? It's been in 10 for quite a while, but that's developmental. Once it's confirmed it's stable, it goes down into the 9 stable, and that eventually becomes version 9.2. But PCBSD is saying, why wait for 9.2? You can have it now.
Go get it now,
With
man.
that, they will.
I like that.
They run their own FreeBSD update server, so you'll be able to get the latest version of the OS once a month on the first of each month. So you get the latest stable version, which includes a bunch of cool stuff like things that are in stable that aren't in release yet. The top command has an extra status line of all the information about ZFS if you have it enabled.
Oh, cool.
So like how much memory is being used for your ARC and your metadata and other data and all that stuff. There's a bunch of ZFS features like a new compression algorithm that's more compression and less CPU than most of the other ones. It's the best trade-off of speed and compressibility. It's got version 5000 of ZFS instead of version 28.
5,000?
Yeah. So Oracle has these numbers, and they've kept going, right? They've done like version 34 or whatever, right?
Okay.
Of ZFS.
Yeah.
But the last one that was open source was 28.
Right.
So
right.
when FreeBSD makes a change, they don't want to call their version 28 because that'll cause a problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, we're integrating with Illumos and the Mac version of ZFS and the Linux version of ZFS, the multiple Linux versions of ZFS, and so on and so on. So as a group, they've decided we'll set the version number to 5,000. So that way, if you try to mount it on a Oracle box, it'll understand that won't work.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they have this system called feature flags, where in the metadata, there'll be a flag saying, hey, this pool supports, that new compression algorithm called LZ4, or it supports trim, or, basically flags for each different feature. So to make sure the version numbers never conflict, they set the version number to 5,000 and switch to having flags for whether your pool supports this feature or that feature.
It's a clever workaround. I like that.
Yes.
It fixes the problem nicely.
Yeah, so you get the newer version of ZFS and all the good stuff that entails. There's a bunch of other cool stuff in there, fixes and improvements and so on. Netflix runs 9 stable because it has a bunch of fixes they've committed to improve network performance on 10 gigabit interfaces and stuff like that.
I think one of the things PCBSD is quickly doing is it's sort of for BSD enthusiasts. It's sort of the way to get some of the coolest stuff right away, isn't it?
Yes, well, especially the release cycle on FreeBSD has slowed down a bit. Like it used to be kind of on time every 6 months or more, and now, it's been quite a while since 9.1 came out, right?
Yeah. So this is sort of a way to get people the freshest stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's always been available via SBN, and that's kind of what the developers use and so on.
Right.
Yeah. This kind of gets it out there. And if you're running the stable version, the package ng repos will update on the 5th and 20th of each month.
Oh, yeah. Man, that's nice. I like that. I like knowing, okay, today's the 5th. I need to check for new packages.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Microsoft Patch Tuesday, only way better. And twice. That's nice.
Yes. And most of this is possible just because of the improvements with Poudre, the system that builds the packages for package ng. It can build the entire ports tree of like 24,000 apps in like a day instead of weeks.
Weeks? Yeah, wow.
Well, because before they did all this, there was all this code in there trying to make it run across multiple machines, left over from when machines had 1 or 2 processors.
Mm-hmm.
But now it just does 1 jail per core on your system and then runs, like on my machine, 32 jobs concurrently. And it basically starts a separate jail for each package and compiles each package basically in a void.
Oh, that's cool.
And then, so once it's built all the prereqs, it starts a fresh jail. It says, all right, I want to build OpenOffice now. So it installs the already built packages for all of the prereqs and then builds OpenOffice.
That is next generation, Alan, right there.
Yeah. And basically, it also has a scheduling algorithm where it will try to make the different chains finish at the same time so that you don't end up with every package is built except a bunch of dependencies in front of OpenOffice are going to take another day to finish compiling. Mm-hmm. So it has this cool scheduling algorithm. Although they're making that pluggable now because they want to... there's some researchers at a university that want to work on building an even better algorithm for it. And rather than having to mess with the patches all the time, they'll just make it a pluggable thing so you can just switch which algorithm you're using.
Very awesome. Gosh, it kind of makes me want to download and play with PCBSD.
Yeah, well, it's like package-ng is so amazing now. It's like, should make it so Linux could use it. I'm like, but then they should just use FreeBSD altogether.
I don't know if you've heard, Alan, but I'm a big Arch guy now. So
I heard this.
Yeah.
But wouldn't Arch be better if it had package-ng?
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
So
then it's like, well, why are we using Arch at all?
I want to encourage bad behavior, and if you guys would like to send me a bit message for TechSNAP, I've generated a TechSNAP bit message address, and I have that in the show notes if you want to send this in.
I forgot the other important news.
Oh, there was something else?
PCBSD is going to be basically fully adopting ZFS. They're going to do away with the option to have non-ZFS file system. And they're embracing boot environments, which is this way where you have multiple ZFS snapshots or clones of your root file system. So you can basically take a snapshot, make some changes. If it doesn't work on reboot, you can say, I want to go back to this snapshot.
So I gotta start using ZFS. I just gotta.
Yeah, like I have one set up on my laptop set up with these boot environments. So I don't have the bootloader thing yet because that's something new that's coming in FreeBSD 9.2. But I can switch between a 10 current developmental kernel and a 9.1 stable kernel. So I just run a command, and next time I reboot, it boots off the other one. But basically, they're going to have this in the boot menu now, so that I can choose which kernel I want when I'm booting up.
Slick.
So, great. Because of this, and the fact that ZFS really wasn't designed to work on i386, and based on the fact that the number of downloads for the i386 have fallen off quite sharply, and the fact that almost every machine built in the last 10 years is 64-bit, except for some really low-end laptops from like 2005 that have like Core Solo processors.
Centrons and
they're going to end support for i386 on PCBSD.
It's a controversy. That
Not
probably
really.
makes sense. Although all of you netbook owners out there might be
you're-
sad.
Yeah, but if you're running PCBSD with ZFS and the KDE full GUI and everything, you probably weren't doing it on a machine with less than 4 gigs of RAM and a tiny slow processor anyway.
I hope not. Otherwise, that sounds miserable.
Exactly. So, if you have 10-year-old hardware, you probably want to target a different distro anyway.
It is 2013.
Yeah.
It is time we move on.
Yeah.
Everyone.
I think the last processors, other than a couple of Atoms that were made that were 32-bit only, was January 2006. The Core Duos.
Right, the first ones.
For laptops.
Yeah, the first
not
generation.
the Core 2 Duos, the Core Duos.
Right.
Which is like the first dual core, but weren't 64-bit. And that was those came out in January of 2006. And that's the newest hardware I could find that wasn't 64-bit, other than some Atoms. Although even the newer Atoms are 64-bit now.
And as Riley points out in our IRC, now Arch will see a large surge of users who are desperate to find a platform that supports i386.
Well, FreeBSD still supports i386, and you can run like really light desktop environments like i3 and LXDE and XFCE and so on.
Hey, I know a guy that's running on, I think, a 486. Is that possible? It must be really old.
Yep. If you want to run the current version of FreeBSD on a 486,
it's not current,
it requires some tuning because the kernel is bigger than the amount of RAM you probably have.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not current, but it's not. I remember being impressed that it wasn't ancient. It was semi-modern, but I can't remember the details.
I'm sure 6 still works fine on a 486.
Maybe it might have been 6. I don't know.
But you could if you made a custom kernel for it, you could do it because there are people that make embedded devices that run FreeBSD, right? And so they only have small amounts of RAM, so they tune the kernel down and take out support for things they don't need, like SCSI controllers and IPv6 and
Now, all right, now I want to give my plug for BitMessage just because I want to see this project get some testing. Remember, if you're going to use BitMessage, consider yourself a beta tester. But I'll have the TechSNAP specific address in the show notes if you want to send us a note, and I'll try to check that before next week's episode. It's an interesting encrypted messaging system. It's not a chat program. It's more of an email replacement, which has anonymity and encryption built in. Kind of interesting. It kind of has a similar network as Bitcoin. All right, Alan, I want to, other than BitMessage, we've also got TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com and the contact link, or even better, start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, and then we'll feature your question in a future episode of the TechSNAP program. Or you can even join us live. Ask the questions live.
Sure.
All right, Alan, with the emails all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, give you some links to follow up on your own. And a lot of these links came from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Alan, I think the first Roundup link is mine this week. It was a story that kind of came out over the weekend. A lot of people are familiar with Edward Snowden and his NSA leaks. Well, one of the things that was leaked is that there was some hacking going on at the 2009 G20 summit. And one of the things that included was, I believe it was an American intelligence agency, set up a fake internet cafe.
This is GCHQ, which is a British intelligence agency.
A fake internet cafe, so people checking like their email and making web browsing stuff could all be monitored. And I guess that was used for, to position the debates or to position the discussions. What I find interesting about the story is just the idea that a group of people could go in and let's just set up a fake coffee shop with internet connectivity.
Well, they're not a group of people; it's the government. This is different,
I know, but it's. I kind of think it's brilliant in some ways. Like, I respect just the level that they can go to in some regards. It's freaky. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of impressive too, and that's what blew me away with the story. It's like, damn, they erected an entire coffee shop to do this. So Edward Snowden
hard to throw a couple computers in any space you can find and be like, hey, it's an internet cafe.
So the reason why I thought it was part of an American intelligence agency because it was part of the documents that Edward Snowden handed over to the Guardian.
Right. As people don't seem to realize that the intelligence agencies of allied countries like specifically Canada, the U.S., Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand,
Germany,
share information. Right. This is why there was such a big brouhaha about the Canadian guy working for the Russians and selling secrets, right? Remember with the floppy disks and you have to move them between machines? Mm-hmm. We covered it a couple months ago.
Yeah.
The British were particularly upset about this because some of their secret information had been shared and eventually got out to the Russians because of a security lapse in Canada, right? And so, it's not abnormal for these countries to share information with each other.
No. In fact, it was in the intelligence hearings that happened this last week over the PRISM stuff. They said that the internet monitoring had helped prevent 50 terrorist attacks, only 10 of which, according to them, were in the U.S. The rest were all in our allied countries. They were not attacks in the U.S. So the bulk majority of our internet surveillance intelligence has helped our allies and not the United States. So that kind of gives you an indication of how much sharing is involved there. And it's great because we're able to just watch all the other countries' traffic as it comes into the States. And
because, so with a program like PRISM, if you're the British government and you're worried about Facebook, well, what if the traffic's going to a data center in the States?
Right. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I think there's probably some sort of legal funsies they get to have when if the United States collects data on Alan Jude and hands that over to the Canadian government, that's got to have a different set of rules applied to it than if the Canadian government were to collect that data themselves, I would think. So I wonder how that works.
Although when it's intelligence agencies are a bit different than if it was, the police to be used in court.
Right.
Data collected by intelligence agency isn't usually used in court necessarily.
Interesting. I've heard from a lot of our, we had Tim earlier from Germany, but I've heard from a lot of people overseas who are really angry at the situation. I think I would be absolutely livid if I was them, so I completely understand. And then to see this story, to see how they can, this is back in 2009, and they were just doing it supposedly, so they say, to get an advantage in the talks.
Yep.
Blows my mind. Anyways, it was an interesting story. I just wanted to flag it because I thought some people might want to read it. We'll have the link if you want to read the full thing in the show notes. The next story, I didn't really hear much about this, Alan, but maybe I've been living under a rock. Did you hear much about this LinkedIn DNS hijacking problem?
I didn't hear much about it. I was informed about it today to make sure I talked about it. And then in my research, I found what actually happened. But yeah, LinkedIn and a bunch of other sites, including Fidelity.com, which I think is an insurance company or something, experienced basically an outage where their DNS records pointed to the wrong place. So
was it a hijack or was it a mistake?
It was thousands of domains were redirected to a parking site. Turns out Network Solutions is taking credit for having accidentally broken it. They're saying it wasn't an attack while Network Solutions was trying to deal with a particularly bad denial of service attack, they may have accidentally rerouted thousands of sites to their parking page instead of
So they were being DDoSed, and to work around it DDoS, they essentially DDoSed.
Not especially, but yeah, kind of.
Well, what are you going to do?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's like, yay for using network solutions. Do you feel warm and fuzzy now?
Well, yeah.
I found it strange because LinkedIn has a bunch of other domains all monitored by Mark Monitor, which is basically a domain registrar that specializes in controlling trademarks. Like most of the Google domains all go through Mark Monitor, and they do the process of registering domains like Google spelled wrong and so on.
Yeah, right.
And so LinkedIn uses them, but not for their main domain. It's at Network Solutions, and it might be interesting to see a couple of weeks from now if LinkedIn.com is still at Network Solutions, or if they take advantage of the Tech 295 discount and move to GoDaddy.
Boom. Good thinking. All right, so our next story. When I think of live tweeting things, I think of Americans sitting on their couch live tweeting about the outrageous things happening in Game of Thrones. Not so much our next story. Pretty crazy. Yes. Somalia militants live tweet during a deadly attack on the UN compound.
Yes.
I guess that's inevitable.
Yeah. So they were, it's all about publicity. The whole point of terrorism is to scare people, and you can scare more people if you use the internet.
Do they include pictures while they were doing it, or just text?
I'm not sure if they did. But they also specifically taunted a certain representative from the UN is being sent to Somalia to kind of represent the UN there.
Oh, yeah.
And, they're talking about they're going to arrive in a couple of weeks or whatever. And, the terrorists are like, so are you going to get all nice and warm and cozy? And then there's a picture of a bombed out street.
Oh, jeez.
Armored cars driving down it.
Oh, really? Threatening him over Twitter, basically? Basically. Come here and you might have this happen.
Well, some of the ridiculous rhetoric was, like the UN is Satan and it only brings destruction and all kinds of ridiculous
propaganda.
Kind of.
Sort of.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we switch gears from that to a rumor that is ripping through the web from the depths of the internet, Alan. The rumor that the PlayStation 4 is running a modified FreeBSD 9.0.
Well,
you think it's possible?
I think the PlayStation 3 had some FreeBSD in it
and
as well.
And some Linux too, right? In a VM.
Well, if you used OS, you could run Linux,
right,
but I'm not sure specifically about it. But yes, this seems to suggest, although the message don't show anything that's very FreeBSD specific.
No, and it's using Grub too.
Yeah, well, PCBSD is going to use Grub to boot FreeBSD as well, right?
GNU Grub, Alan?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's PCBSD, right?
Oh my
That's not included in stock FreeBSD.
That dirty GNU code. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Only you FreeBSD guys.
It seems like a waste of time for PCBSD guys to go write their own bootloader.
No, I commend them for doing it, actually. I think Grub's great. So, all right. So, what do you think? Maybe there is a little PlayStation or a little FreeBSD in the PlayStation 4.
Based on some of the screenshots, especially the way it's loading the modules and the naming scheme of the modules, it definitely looks like FreeBSD.
It's named on the device. They call it Orbis OS.
Orbit, isn't it?
ORBIS. Although Orbit OS would be better. I don't know. I think it'd be pretty neat. I bet that PlayStation 4 would make a crazy great workstation. It's got Intel-based chips in there.
Oh, does it now?
Yeah, they're going to Intel. Yeah, and it's all it's essentially a really compact, high-powered PC.
Like definitely you can see the bootloader going on here, and the way the directories are structured and stuff. And those are some pretty standard FreeBSD stuff. Although there's a subset of their own stuff in here, obviously. But
I see. I didn't see these other screenshots. Oh, that kind of makes it a slam dunk, doesn't it?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Although he's sitting here at a shell and he doesn't do anything to kind of prove it's FreeBSD.
Yeah, seriously. How about Uname? How about you just do that or something like that?
Well, that would probably just say Orbis OS. But it would probably make it obvious.
Kind of makes me want a PlayStation 4. Of course, I'd never get to do any of that FreeBSD stuff on there.
Why not?
But, all right. I think maybe Google is either insanely brilliant or just plain insane, but I'm sure by now everybody's heard about their Project Loon, and I threw this in the round because I just wanted to hear what you thought about this.
What is it?
So this... Okay, all right. So for those of you who haven't heard, Google is working on a test pilot right now, I believe in New Zealand, where they are providing internet connectivity by putting tons of balloons up in the air. Yeah, now they're calling it Project Loon, and the idea is to fill the air with balloons so that way they could get internet connectivity anywhere in the world, including like oceans and all
Well,
kinds of stuff.
specifically, their main goal with it was in disaster-stricken areas. So after an earthquake, when the regular internet connections aren't working and power isn't working and so on, if you could provide people with Wi-Fi from balloons.
Yeah, and it'll actually like ride the currents of the atmosphere, and they'll move
Well,
around.
because by the sounds of it, the balloons are really high up.
Yes, yeah, they're
Now,
probably not even visible with the human eye.
right, but if they're that high up, did you transmit power enough to actually hit it? I guess it would have to be. Otherwise,
Well, they're
they wouldn't be
doing it. They're doing it right now. In New Zealand, they're doing a test pilot of it, and they're
But I
solar
guess
powered.
you don't really have a problem with line of sight when you're going straight up.
And I guess they're
Or
broadband.
even like, the other problem you would have normally with Wi-Fi is the curve of the earth. But again, if you're going straight up, you don't have that.
and they're saying near DSL broadband speeds.
Right. Although with Wi-Fi, speed quickly decelerates as more people connect to each
Yeah,
AP.
I'm sure it does. Yeah,
Time division, multiplexing, and so on.
I still think. First of all, I don't know if I'd want Google to be the one to do this, but if they get this working, I'm going to buy a boat. I'm getting a boat, and I'm doing the show from a boat from now on, as long as it's decent connectivity.
Pirate radio.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, the law of the sea out here on the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. The name doesn't make any sense anymore, but yeah. All right. The next story comes from the Wall Street Journal. Former Tiger Direct president indicted in a $230 million laundering scheme.
Yeah, so basically, the former president of Tiger Direct is accused of accepting $7 million in bribes in order to steer Tiger Direct's business towards specific manufacturers in Taiwan and California, and basically giving them $230 million worth of business.
Wow, he's being held on a $1 million bond over this.
Well, he owns like a $7 million house in Florida.
Oh, so it's not much money for him.
Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. Sometimes you wonder, why is this kind of silly brand really the top thing on Tiger Direct all the time?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the
Maybe
one.
why. Next link in the roundup, I was like, I'm not so sure about a list.
But
Then
anyway, I put that in there because other than Newegg, it's one of the bigger
right.
computer stores.
Right. You know what? And I've never been a big fan. Just saying. I know a lot of people like them.
They were in Canada long before Newegg was, so they were kind of an only option for a while.
I had more familiarity when they were only a magazine, and that's where I had a lot of problems. But never really got them in their web. All right, so this next one, I kind of love this list. 9 reasons sysadmins hate you. And then if you're like, oh, a list, read the number 1 and then tell me you don't agree with this, sysadmins. Number 1, they bypass the help desk system. Yes. Number 2, you're vague. That's why we hate you, because you're often vague when you describe the problem.
Like the internet's not working. It's like when they say the internet's down, it's like,
oh my gosh.
Like, there's a problem on my machine where I can't access
the internet's not working.
Website.
I don't know what happened. It just kicked me out. I was just browsing the web and it just kicked me out. My internet's not working.
Oh, right. And right before that, I also, unplugged the cable.
Right. Yeah. They tell you that 15 minutes later. You're abusing your rights. That's always a good one. You don't upgrade. That's a good one. You make urgent last-minute requests.
Even though you've known you needed it for months.
You waste your admin's time. You test your production code. You test your test code on the production system. You make a lot of personal requests, even though you say, I know I shouldn't, but could you help me with this problem? Yeah, that happens a lot.
And the example there is, my home laptop is, well, they exaggerate. An example there is like, my 5-year-old home laptop,
Windows
can you
98.
reformat it so that my son can play Far Cry 3 on it?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't tell you how many laptops that the CEO has brought in and said, would you reload this for my grandkid or for my son? I know it's not a company machine. What's great is when they bring in the home machines and then complain the other stuff isn't getting done. But I'll get through the rest of the list. You take the admin for granted, not getting the slightest recognition when everything works, but being excessively blamed when something fails. Isn't that true? That is one of the untold things about being a sysadmin is people kind of forget why you're around and what you do when everything works, because part of your job is just making sure everything runs as it should. That's you being successful. But when things fail, oh boy, they know who you are. That's always been that's why it's really important to document and try to have, if you have a ticketing system, put details in there to show I'm generating value for you by keeping this thing running. That's me being good.
Yeah, well, that's part of the point of having tickets for everything. And also, some places it got to the point where they have SLAs, right? Where a ticket has to be answered in a certain amount of time. Or based on certain volumes. So when people make a request and you spend time on it and it's not in the ticket system, you're not getting credit for having done the work.
I like this next story. A cookie clearinghouse It's a project between a joint project, right, between Mozilla and Opera.
It's Stanford University started it, and then they've got Mozilla and Opera on board in it. And basically, we've talked about this idea of being able to opt out of tracking cookies, but then some companies don't comply with the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So Stanford's law department is setting up a clearinghouse where they'll basically have a whitelist and a blacklist, saying, all right, these cookies definitely follow the rules, so we can, if you opt out, you'll actually be opted out. And these cookies definitely don't follow the rules, so you're going to just not even accept the cookie.
It's not really the same approach to like spam blacklist, but it's starting to create this community database of good and bad stuff.
Well, yeah, it's like a reputation system.
Yeah.
Kind of like,
I like that.
Not like blacklist, but more like a reputation system for spam.
Right.
Except for cookies. And it will force advertising companies to either comply with the real rules or have their cookies eaten.
Can I take that job? All right. So frequent, not contributor, but somebody we feature a lot on the show is Bruce Schneier, and he had penned a piece on evidence that the NSA is storing voice content, not just the metadata. What was the sort of synopsis here?
Basically, looking at some of the evidence and saying that he changed his mind that previously he thought it was impossible. Now he thinks that it might actually be happening.
Right. He thought it wouldn't just technically be doable, and now he's kind of rethought the thing, and he kind of writes through that.
The General Alexander told members of Congress that they can record the content of phone calls and that they have the technical capabilities. So,
right. I guess it's an interesting, thoughtful piece because he's changed his position.
And William Binney, a former NSA technical director, told the Daily Caller that the NSA records the phone calls of 500,000 to 1 million people who are on a so-called target list. So they don't record everybody, but they do record a large volume of phone calls.
Right, and doesn't that make sense? That's kind of how the system would work. You'd have a list, you activate somebody on that list, and now the system starts tracking and recording them. And yeah. I actually played a clip from William Binney, and I'm sure on the last name. Played several clips from him in last night's episode of Unfiltered because he's been an NSA whistleblower for years, and he's been blowing the whistle since about 2006 on these surveillance programs. I mean, this is not necessarily new information. He's been talking about it for years, and so now he's talking to everybody to listen. He had a great piece in USA Today. He was on CNN just recently. So I played a lot of clips in yesterday's episode of Unfiltered. If you guys want to catch some of that. All right, on. We have another story here from the Wall Street Journal. 2 in the roundup. Is it really about gold, or is Chrome being crazy? I think Chrome must be being crazy.
Yeah, there's probably an ad before the video. It's Richard Bedlich, the guy that from the CTO from Mandiant, the guys that did that report where they caught the Chinese hacker on video and everything,
and brought it down right to that building, even.
Yeah, basically giving a short interview with the Wall Street Journal about what businesses need to know about cybersecurity, and basically talking about a couple of the key points, like rather than having these vague rules about what should be happening, where the IT department has set some kind of benchmark. We're saying, if a machine is compromised, we will find out about it within this amount of time. And then putting in place a policy so that you can actually do that. Right? Because, some businesses, some of the things we've seen from like these places that were hacked is sometimes the machines were infected for 6 months before they found out.
Right.
So then, that's their biggest concern.
And actually, that was something.
Putting in place a system so they can find out when something happens sooner.
That has been something Mandiant has specialized in a lot of cases. They were involved in the New York Times hacking that we covered about a year ago, where the New York Times had been compromised for a while and then realized it, and then Mandiant was one of the corporations they hired to come in and sort of do a post-analysis of the hack, I guess you could say.
Yep.
All right, well, interesting. We'll have that video linked in the show notes if you guys want to watch that. All right, now we're going to wrap up.
There's one more story.
Right, I know. So we're going to wrap up the roundup with, you see what I was doing there? A MySQL story.
Yes. There was a big story earlier in the week.
Got the man page?
Yes, it caused lots of open source people to shit the bed. MySQL man pages suddenly had a license saying that they couldn't be redistributed. Basically, they had the Oracle commercial license rather than the regular GPL license. I think it was actually GPL rather than like the GNU document license. But anyway.
Right.
It turns out that was a bug, and that the newest version of MySQL for each branch that they pushed out to fix the bug has the man pages back with the GNU license.
That's an odd bug. I guess maybe they just had it like on a
I'm
template.
guessing they were resyncing the commercial man pages with the open source man pages because basically the same man page, just dual licensed.
Right.
And yeah,
that would make sense. All right. Well, now I think that
or
brings us
it's
to
a
the
clever way of doing a 180 really quickly.
end. Right.
But
Or
considering
they're
how
behind the
fast-
scenes, they're getting ready for something.
The amount of time before it happened, the amount of time from when it started catching news and when it was fixed, it was short enough that I don't think it was intentional.
Right. So like WWNSX is saying in the chat room, this time people freaked out for nothing. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
All
Whereas
right.
last time when it was the time zone updates for Java, that was legitimate freaking out.
Right. Which we covered last week.
Yes.
Okay, and I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, if you're wrapping up and you want to go watch something else now, Ange completes her Android challenge this week on the Faux Show, so go check out this week's Faux Show, which we'll be recording later tonight, and see her thoughts on switching from iOS to Android and what apps helped her make that transition, and if she ran into any bumps along the way. Well, I'm sure it'll be a fun episode. Alan?
This will be big news next week,
What's
but Oracle has officially end-of-life Java 6.
Bum, bum, bum. I know that's going to upset a few people that have applications that require that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see where the fallout is. And
Oracle will no longer post updates for Java SE6 in its public download sites. All Java 6 releases up to and including version 6 update 45 will be moved to the Java archive in the Oracle Technology Network, where they will remain available but not receive further updates.
the Java
Oracle
archive.
recommends that users migrate to Java 7 in order to continue.
Of course. The Java archive, the Java Technology Archive, I picture is sort of like the archive at the end of Indiana Jones, where there's just this huge warehouse of discoveries. That's what the Oracle Java Technology Archive looks
Interestingly,
like.
Apple just pushed update 16 for their Java, which is actually Java 6 update 51, which is apparently a newer version than anybody else can have.
I don't understand. All right. So, Alan, we need to tell people when they can watch the show live so they can hang out in our chat room. If you go over to jblive.tv on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
That's right. And, of course, jblive.info is where you can find the audio version. We have high bitrate and low bitrate for you commuters. And then you can just listen on your smartphone while you're driving. How about that, huh? That's right. Check that out. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.